colleague is with him. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you also to journalists who are joining us online as well. You're all very welcome to this press conference for the closing ceremony of the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction 2022. Let me immediately hand over to Mami Mizuturi, the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of UNDRR. Mami.
Well, thank you, Janet. Good evening, members of the press. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We just came out from the wonderful closing ceremony of the 7th Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction. I am joined today by Pak Suharyanto, the head of the National Disaster Management Agency of the Republic of Indonesia, and Ambassador Manuel Bessler, who is from the Swiss Development Corporation and will be our next host for the 8th Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction. So, first of all, I would like to say that the Global Platform, against all odds and with a lot of challenges, was, to my mind, a great success, and I hope that a lot of the participants share this with me. There was a tremendous support from our host, the government of the Republic of Indonesia, and many partners, donors, who made this gathering possible. Of course, the participants who flew from far in very difficult conditions still, because we are living in the not yet post-COVID, but still in the COVID era, I can happily announce that we had around 4,000 participants, of which 3,200 around were with us in person, and these people came from 185 nationalities. So almost all of the member states of the United Nations. There were 108 official delegations who registered, and 86 participated in person. So from the member state governments, there was a very, very high level of participation. But of course, the Sendai framework calls for whole of society achievement implementation, so the non-governmental stakeholders are very important. We had 16 stakeholder groups recognized by the United Nations present, and this includes the private sector, parliamentarians, women, children and youth, academia, senior citizens, and persons with disability, indigenous people, to name just a few. Now, from the outset, working with our host, the government of Indonesia and BNPB, we really worked to make this inclusive, accessible, and safe global platform. The part of the safety was always discussed very much in detail. We had a COVID task force, and thankfully, because the COVID situation became very much under control by the time of this global platform, we were able to have a safe but a relatively mobile ambience that we could create. In terms of accessibility, you may have already observed that there are many features in this beautiful conference center that allows for extended accessibility, and this is something that I'm proud to say is a legacy of the global platform, because the Indonesian government took on our requests to make this conference center accessible, and as a result, I'm also very happy to announce that the number of persons with disability who participated in person was doubled from the last platform in 2019 in Geneva. These are some statistics that show how energetic, how diverse, how rich in content this conference was, and we did announce, Pak Suharyanto announced a summary of the Bali Agenda for Resilience, which portrays the outcome of this important conference. Now, the next, as I mentioned, the global platform will happen in 2025, but between now and then, from Bali to Geneva, there are other many important milestones. The one that will come quite soon is COP27, where we will make a contribution from the disaster risk reduction community to the climate change community. And then, of course, next year in New York in 2023, May, we have the midterm review conference on the implementation of the Sendai framework. And this is also a very important moment. And there will be other regional gatherings, and we will take the agenda to Switzerland in 2025. By that time, I hope that there is much more enhancement of this agenda. But I will stop here and give the floor back to Jeanette.
Thank you very much for those remarks, Mami. And now it is my pleasure to hand to Pak Suryanto, the head of the National Disaster Management Authority.
Terima kasih, moderator Miss Janet. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Indonesia telah berhasil menyelenggarakan GPDRR 2022 terlepas dari adanya tantangan pandemi COVID-19. Hal ini tentu tidak dapat terjadi tanpa kerja keras dan kontribusi dari seluruh kementerian dan lembaga, masyarakat sipil, lembaga usaha, akademisi, serta media. Oleh karena itu, kami mengucapkan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya kepada rekan-rekan sekalian.
Indonesia has successfully convened the 2022 GPDRR despite the challenges from the COVID-19 pandemic. This event could not have been made possible without the hard work and contributions from all ministries and institutions, the civil society, business institutions, academia, and the media. Therefore, we'd like to thank all of you.
Indonesia mengapresiasi kehadiran 7.000 lebih delegasi dari 185 negara untuk berpartisipasi aktif dalam GPDRR 2022, baik secara fisik maupun virtual. Angka ini menandakan tingginya kepercayaan dunia terhadap penanggulangan COVID-19 di bawah arahan Bapak Presiden Joko Widodo.
Indonesia also appreciates the participations of 7,000 delegates from 185 countries to actively participate in the event, both those who attended the event in person and virtually. And this figure indicates high trust from the international community in the COVID-19 response under the guidance of President Joko Widodo.
Indonesia mengucapkan terima kasih kepada PBB untuk kepercayaannya memilih Indonesia sebagai tuan rumah GPDRR 2022. Hal ini menegaskan kembali kepemimpinan Indonesia bukan hanya dalam agenda kebencanaan Asia Pasifik, tetapi juga di dunia.
Indonesia would also like to thank the United Nations for the trust in choosing Indonesia as the host of this event, and this reaffirms Indonesia's leadership not only in the disaster agenda in the Asia Pacific but also in the world.
Selanjutnya, sebagaimana yang disampaikan oleh Bapak Presiden Joko Widodo pada saat upacara pembukaan, Indonesia telah menawarkan kepada dunia agenda resiliensi berkelanjutan. Agenda ini terdiri di atas 4 poin penting, diantaranya 1. Penguatan budaya kesiapsiagaan bencana, 2. Investasi di bidang sains, teknologi, dan inovasi kebencanaan, 3. Membangun infrastruktur dan resilien terhadap bencana dan perubahan iklim, Dan keempat adalah komitmen mengimplementasikan kesepakatan global ke tingkat lokal.
As stated by President Jokowi at the opening ceremony, Indonesia has offered a sustainable resilience agenda to the world, which consists of 4 important points, including A, strengthening the culture of disaster preparedness, B, investment in science, technology, and disaster innovation, C, building of infrastructure that is resilient to disasters and climate change, and D, commitment to implementing global agreements to the local level.
Agenda Bali untuk resiliensi yang merupakan hasil GPDRR 2022 kiranya dapat menjadi jawaban atas tantangan dunia mengenai bagaimana penanggulangan bencana dilakukan pasca pandemi COVID-19 dan di tengah ancaman perubahan iklim. Agenda ini turut menekankan pentingnya konteks dan kearifan lokal dalam menghadapi segala risiko bencana di depannya.
Bali's agenda for resilience, which is the outcome of the 2022 GPDRR, may be the answer to the world's challenges regarding how disaster management is carried out in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and in the midst of the threat of climate change. And this agenda also emphasizes the importance of context and local wisdom in dealing with all future disaster risk.
Indonesia juga akan secara konsisten mengarus utamakan agenda Bali untuk resiliensi dalam rangkaian kepemimpinan Indonesia ke depan, termasuk presidensi G20 tahun 2022 dan keketuaan ASEAN tahun 2023.
Indonesia will consistently mainstream the Bali Agenda for Resilience in Indonesia's future leadership, including the G20 presidency in 2022 and the ASEAN chairmanship in 2023.
Indonesia juga berharap bahwa agenda ini dapat menjadi kontribusi penting terhadap pembahasan konferensi tingkat menteri penanggulangan bencana se-Asia Pasifik pada bulan September 2022 nanti dan forum politik tingkat tinggi mengenai pembangunan berkelanjutan dan peninjauan kembali kerangka Sendai tengah periode tahun 2023.
Indonesia also hopes that this agenda can be an important contribution to the discussions of the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Management in September 2022 and the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development and the Midterm Review of the Sendai Framework for the 2023.
Selanjutnya dari sisi penyelenggaraan, Indonesia telah secara maksimal mengupayakan agar penyelenggaraan GPDRR kali ini bersifat inklusif. Antara lain yang pertama adalah hal ini dibuktikan dengan meningkatnya angka partisipasi dari rekan-rekan dengan disabilitas jika dibandingkan pada GPDRR tahun 2019. Kali ini Indonesia menyambut baik kehadiran lebih dari 200 orang rekan-rekan dengan disabilitas. Kedua, Indonesia juga telah menetapkan jalur prioritas khusus dalam proses registrasi dan memeriksa seluruh akomodasi resmi agar dapat memfasilitasi rekan-rekan penyandang disabilitas. Ketiga, Indonesia juga berhasil mempertahankan angka partisipasi perempuan. Pada sesi GPDRR kali ini, setidaknya sekitar 40% perempuan hadir baik sebagai panelis maupun sebagai delegasi.
Indonesia has made efforts so that the implementations of the GPDRR this time is inclusive. First, this is evidenced by the increased participation rate of colleagues with disabilities compared to the 2019 GPDRR. This time, Indonesia welcomed the presence of more than 200 colleagues with disabilities. Second, Indonesia has also set a special priority lane in the registration process and checks all officials' accommodations in order to facilitate fellow persons with disabilities. And third, Indonesia also managed to maintain the women's participation rate in this GPDRR session, while at least 40% of women attended either as panelists or delegates.
Indonesia juga telah secara maksimal menjalankan protokol kesehatan guna mencegah penyebaran kasus COVID-19 selama penyelenggaraan GPDRR, mulai dari mendorong seluruh peserta untuk tetap menggunakan masker, selalu mencuci tangan dan menjaga jarak, hingga kewajiban untuk mengikuti tes PCR sebelum upacara pembukaan dan penutupan GPDRR ini.
Indonesia has also implemented health protocols to prevent the spread of COVID-19 cases during the implementations of the GPDRR, starting from encouraging all participants to keep wearing masks, to always wash hands and to maintain distance, to take a mandatory PCR test before the opening and closing ceremonies of the GPDRR.
Terakhir, penyelenggaraan GPDR 2022 ini juga berbeda dari sesi sebelumnya. Mengingat Indonesia juga menghadirkan Rumah Resiliensi Indonesia atau RRI yang merupakan produk dan aksi nyata baik penanggulan bencana di tanah air. Indonesia juga membuktikan bahwa JPDR kali ini bukan hanya sekedar diskusi biasa.
Finally, the implementations of the 2022 GPDRR is also different from the previous session, considering that Indonesia also presents the Indonesian Resilience House, which is a product and real actions of best practices in disaster management in the country. Indonesia proved that the GPDRR this time was not just an ordinary discussion.
Demikian yang bisa kami sampaikan. Sampai berjumpa dalam pertemuan JPDRR berikutnya di Swiss. Sekian, terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
That concludes my statement. See you at the next GPDRR meeting in Switzerland. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum.
Thank you very much for these remarks. And now I would like to hand the floor to Ambassador Bessler, the State Secretary and Deputy Director General of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation from the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs for Switzerland.
Thank you very much, Janet. As a representative of a donor country that supports DRR strongly, I can only echo what the special representative for DRR said. It was a great, intense, eventful conference, and thanks to the great host country of Indonesia, and particularly here in Bali, we felt safe, we felt animated, motivated, but we also felt in an environment that was committed to UNDRR as such, but also to the disaster reduction as a topic. And just hearing now the Minister and Lieutenant General, all the commitments that Indonesia is ready to take on and to go on is impressive. Now, as the special representative said, the way from Bali to Geneva, although only 3 years, will not be that easy. You set the bar quite high with all the hospitality and the big events and the shows you put up. We will be in close contact also with Indonesia to find a good way to put the 8th global platform, or to find the right balance. To make it an inclusive meeting, it's important to bring people together. It's important to have the interaction. But on the other hand, as we all speak about the gas house exhaust and the gas house problems that we are facing, we have to take into account to think about how we bring down the carbon footprint. It's a bit of a dilemma. It's not so easy. But in this regard, I look very much forward to see you, to see, of course, UNDRR, to see also the media following this pathway from Bali to Geneva, because the topic stays with us. And only with a continued and strong engagement we will be able to address the targets. Yes, of course, of the Sadar framework, but also of the Paris Agreement, as well of the Sustainable Development Goal. These are quite ambitious goal, and we have to do all what we can to get as close as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all our speakers. We don't have very long, but we will take a few questions. Please raise your hand and please introduce yourself and the media house that you are coming from. If you could please start with the lady in the front here, and please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Eno from National Radio. My first question to Pak Suharyanto. Tadi Anda menyebutkan ada 7 rekomendasi yang disampaikan dari pertemuan ini, Pak. Bagaimana komitmen Indonesia sebagai tuan rumah untuk mewujudkan berbagai komitmen itu, 7 poin tadi rekomendasi, dan kemudian bagaimana Indonesia juga mendorong dunia untuk melakukan hal yang sama, terutama terkait dengan anggaran terkait kebencanaan. My second question for Madam Mami. Could you please elaborate a little bit about the Sadar framework that has been discussed during the meeting? Thank you.
Terima kasih atas pertanyaannya. Tadi siapa? Emma ya. Jadi tadi dari hasil pelaksanaan kegiatan JPDR tadi kami sudah bacakan 7 butir, nanti secara lengkap akan bisa di-copy isinya, tapi intinya di situ kan ini adalah pertengahan sejak ditentukan Sendai Framework itu. Nah, dalam pertengahan ini 7 tahun ini kita ingin melihat sampai sejauh mana yang sudah dilakukan oleh semua negara yang sudah berkomitmen terhadap Sendai Framework tersebut terkait dengan penanggulangan bencana dan pengurangan risiko bencana. Nah, tentu saja Indonesia yang sudah menyatakan tuan rumah dan meminta Indonesia pada saat 2019 itu untuk menjadi tuan rumah di 2022 ini, dan 7 butir yang dihasilkan dari acara ini tentu saja ini menjadikan pegangan bagi semua negara, dan tentu saja Indonesia akan menjadi yang terdepan. Dari sisi anggaran terkait bencana-bencana yang ada di dalam negeri, tentu saja sedapat mungkin Indonesia akan mengatasinya. Tetapi seperti kita ketahui bersama, seperti pernah terjadi di 2004, terjadinya tsunami begitu, tidak mungkin Indonesia menutup diri terkait dengan mungkin bantuan-bantuan dari luar negeri. Itulah gunanya kolaborasi dan kerjasama yang dihasilkan dari pertemuan-pertemuan seperti ini. Kemudian juga apabila di negara-negara lain juga ada bencana, juga kita tetap membantu baik dari sisi anggaran, sisi perlengkapan, mungkin personil yang dikirim ke sana. Nah, itu yang dihasilkan antara lain seperti itu deh. Jadi kita tetap komitmen betul, mudah-mudahan nanti di GPDRR berikutnya 3 tahun yang akan datang di 2015 di Geneva Peace ini sudah semakin maju lagi dari yang disampaikan sejak awal di Sendai Framework tersebut. Mungkin seperti itu yang bisa kami jawab. Terima kasih.
So thank you for your question. Well, actually, the global platform itself is all about the Sendai framework, but because this global platform was the one just before the midterm review of the Sendai framework implementation, there was a lot of discussion around stock taking. How far have we come? And the most important thing in this regard is that, well, there was a lot of recognition that we're not totally on track. The people who died from disaster, which was getting lower, the number, because of early warning systems, COVID changed that trend. And with all the other targets too, number of people affected, the level of economic loss, destruction to infrastructure, all these targets are not, I would say, on track. But what was quite encouraging about this global platform was because people presented a lot of solutions. What can we do about this? And for example, in terms of what we call good risk governance, how can we manage disaster risk, there were many suggestions around how we can create a whole of government, whole of society approach. In that context, a lot of reference was made to the way that communities must be engaged. Of course, governments are in the main driver's seat, if you will, but I think post-COVID, there is a strong recognition that engaging communities is an important way of reducing disaster risk. In terms of financing, lack of financing for disaster risk reduction, which is another big challenge in implementing the Sendai framework, there was a lot of discussion around that. But here too, you can see in the very concise 3-page of the co-chair summaries, final considerations, there were very concrete decisions, not decisions, but suggestions made how to go forward. And I would mention one more thing which came out strongly is that the fact that, yes, we are hopefully coming out from COVID, there are lessons learned, and the message is the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic must be applied before the window of opportunity closes. And this is important for the Sendai framework because one of the 4 priorities is to build back better. Now, if there is a time that we have to build back better, I mean, now is the time. If we cannot build back better from the COVID-19 COVID-19 pandemic, then the cause is lost. So that was one of the strong things. But I do really recommend you to read this Bali Agenda for Resilience, final considerations for the closing remarks in full, because it is just 2 pages, but it's a really rich content of 2 pages of what are the challenges and what can be the solutions if we act now.
Thank you very much. The gentleman here.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Zul Hafiz. I'm from TVRI World. So I'd like to ask several questions for representatives for UNDRR, Madam Mami. I believe the 7th Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction is a great platform to share knowledge and experiences in order to, reduce disaster risk, particular, for Indonesia. And I'm wondering from the UNDRR perspectives, what is the UNDRR commitment to assisting Indonesia with disaster risk reduction? And what about Indonesia's national disaster preparedness from UNDRR's perspective? And lastly, the question is, how does the UNDRR encourage beneficial multilateral disaster cooperation in Indonesia, particular to reduce disaster risk? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first of all, as you may know, and I think it's obvious, but sometimes it doesn't become obvious, we are part of the UN system. Our job is to support member states. It is the member states who have their national priorities, and we are here to support the member states in their endeavor to make their countries more resilient, in the case of UNDRR. So that is how we operate, that is our goal. Now, and this applies to all member states. In the case of Indonesia that you ask is, Indonesia is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, and that is why Indonesia is one of the most resilient countries in the world. If you think about the number of disasters that Indonesia has to face, and if you look at the number of mortality, of course, every life is important, so you can't say that, if it's, only one person who died, it's okay. But it is remarkable the amount of preparedness, but also the preventative measures that go into this country's policy and how it is prioritized. Of course, Pak Suharyanto is the head of BNPB in charge of all of this, but I must say that the fact that there's a commitment from the very top of the government, which is His Excellency the President himself, means that the prevention agenda is high in the list of the government's priority. And this is why the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction is being held here. Of course, we will continue to support, as we do all member states, Indonesia in this area. But I can also say that there is a lot that Indonesia can share with other countries in terms of how they are tackling this issue. And in that same vein, I would say that we believe that, while Indonesia can share a lot, I think that when South-South cooperation is becoming more and more important in terms of international cooperation for disaster risk reduction, I believe that there is a lot that Indonesia can enhance in their cooperation to less developed countries in the global South. And I do finally think that this year, because the Global Platform coincides with the presidency of Indonesia of the G20, I do hope that while Indonesia takes stronger leadership in the global community, that this DRR agenda would also be carried by Indonesia outside the DRR community, by which I mean I strongly hope that at the G20, the outcomes that is elaborated in the final considerations for the closing remarks to build resilience can be shared with the other G20 members so that when thinking about resilience, when building resilience, this outcome of the global platform will also be embedded, and I'm hoping and I'm confident that the chair country will move the agenda forward in G20, in many other multilateral fora.
Thank you very much. There's 2 more questions, and please can we be brief because several of the speakers have to go to other appointments. So gentlemen here and there, and I'll ask you to keep it short, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Matthews Malata from Malawi, but also representing DRH Africa. You said one of the key things in the final briefing, whereby you encourage the media to report more on DRR issues so that we report less on disasters and future, which is quite really good, and thank you for that. But my question is on the private sector involvement. I think this is one of the key issues that we've been struggling with. I'm not too sure, how do you plan to make sure that we do better in this area? And secondly, I'm looking at the issue of political will. Indeed, to accelerate implementation of the Sendai framework, we need political will in a bigger way. How are you planning to engage member states or responsible regional institutions to make sure that we do better? Thank you so much.
So on your first question, I do think that the private sector is really stepping up their act. And what I'm hoping to see is something like the role of the private sector in the climate agenda. You may have been at the Glasgow COP, where you saw that the commitments that came out from the private sector around climate action was very strong. Now, the resilience agenda has not gone that far yet, but if you take, for example, the number of private companies who are now joining our private sector network for resilience, which is called ARISE, it is growing. It's not tremendously big, the number, but it is growing, which is good. And the insurance sector, for example, which is written in specifically in the Sendai framework, their, of course, main way of dealing with risk is risk transfer. But even the insurance sector is looking at ways beyond insurance risk transfer to how can they embed prevention into their insurance policy. And of course, we know that the micro, small, and medium enterprises are hit so badly by disasters. So what we are doing now with these companies is how can the bigger companies help the smaller companies in terms of not only the business continuity plan, which sometimes is much about response, but how can they embed prevention in there? That's what we're seeing. So in a nutshell, we're not there yet totally, but I do think that with every global platform, there are more private sectors coming, and there are more solutions offered by them. On the political will, I think the midterm review process is the big moment. We have asked the member states to conduct voluntary national review process of the implementation of the Sendai framework. To date, I believe, if I'm not wrong, 84 countries have said they will do this. Now, this is not an easy process. They have to involve all the sectors and see how the Sendai framework has been implemented. And it's a totally voluntary thing. Sendai framework is not a legal document. They don't have to do it, if I may be very blunt. But the fact that 84 countries said we would like to do it means that they would really like to see where they are in the implementation. And I'm sure that this is going to lead to enhancement of political will. This conference itself, the number of people who have registered who have never come to a DRR conference is, from what I understand, more than 50%. So that shows that there is a strong interest, focus. And as we know, when the people are interested, when the citizens are interested, the politicians have to sometimes follow. So I see the political will from both sides, top-down and bottom-up building. I hope I'm not, imagining this. I certainly think I'm not. There is a very, very strong as you know, Ambassador Bessler said, commitment to this agenda growing.
And I think Mr. Bessler would also like to say something on this.
Thanks indeed. Great question from a government perspective. DRR is not a nice thing to do, it's absolute an urgent thing to do. And Switzerland will do such a report that the special representative referred to. And I can tell you, we are right now about to write this report. It's not an easy thing. And you have to be honest. And you have to ask all. You know, it's not a government report, only in my office this is written. No, we reach out. Yes, of course, civil society. We have to go to the communities. We have to go to the private sector. And the private sector, I mean it also in a positive way. The moment you present figures, they are on board. And DRR pays off. It saves life, first of all, but it saves a lot of money. And of course, there are always debate. $1 invested in preparation saves 7, 10, I heard even $15 in response. But these are arguments for the private sector to kick in. So very much so, I think this conference here gave focus and gave awareness that we need. And in this regard, there is a momentum, and we very much try to keep this momentum going up to Geneva 2025.
Thank you very much. And the last question, Giacomo, thanks.
Thank you. I'm here for the WBU syndicate coverage of the event. Two small questions. One is to Ambassador Bessler about the, in the conference you said in the conclusion that you will do this effort, but also you will do an effort to convince other countries, regional, to do this voluntary commitment. Could you be more precise how you think to do this? Will be only to the European country or will go larger? The second question is from Ms. Mizzutori and is about, I praise, as my colleague did, about the role of the media that you underlined. But I want to make you aware that the 5-year that Secretary General Gutierrez gave for implementing the early alert, early warning system could find a big problem, because as you know, next year in Geneva, not in Geneva, but I don't know where it will be exactly, but there will be the World Radio Conference where they have to decide about the spectrum. And the spectrum allocation probably will bring away the analog frequencies for radio and television. And this could be a problem because you can get information about the alert, but then you will not be able to reach the citizen. Thank you.
So on your question, I think that's a really important question, because early warning system is not only about putting equipment and covering the world and saying it is covered. It's about how does that early warning actually reach the community and reach not only the most privileged communities, but what we call the last mile. And it's impact-based. So, and of course it has to be multi-hazard as well. I would like to work with you on this issue, which probably is not on the radar of a lot of people, and make a cause that this issue can really impact negatively on this very ambitious but urgently necessary initiative. So let us work on this.
And regarding to this midterm, it's a bit like in a football match. You know, in your half term, the teams go into their locker rooms and the coach really comes down and wants to fire them up. What went wrong? What you have to do more and better? It will not be a holiday brochure that we're going to write or that we are about to write. We want to look what we did so far, we want to take stock, and we want to look forward. And we want, now I speak about the Swiss report, we are looking at how we address disaster risk reduction in Switzerland. Switzerland is a mountainous country. We have a lot of natural forces with which we have to struggle. Avalanches, water, too much, not enough water, snow, stone falls. So also Switzerland is not safe from natural hazards, and we have there a possibility also to share. We will, not a template, but a possible outline of such a report. What you should look, you other countries, and of course always underlining it's absolutely voluntary, but it's only worthwhile the paper you write it on if you're honest, and not to present a nice readable text, but a text that also shows where we have to do more. And I speak for Switzerland only. Yes, we are absolutely aware we have to change gears in order to get there where we want to go. And there the framework set clearly the target.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers, and thank you very much to members of the press for joining us this evening. That concludes the press conference. Thank you.